especially are going to have legal significance and legal ramifications. And you need to be aware of what you're doing and how important it is and how to protect what you've accomplished to make sure that you get the credit and the rewards that you deserve for all the great things that you're doing for wherever it is that you happen to work. And so today I'm going to turn things over to Connie Nichols right here, and she is going to speak for about 40 minutes about her experiences teaching and working in the field of intellectual property law, and then she'll open things up at the end for your questions. So please, as you're listening to the talk, if you have any questions that you might like to ask about your own interest in intellectual property law.
Good morning, and thank you all for having me. This is the most exciting thing I can talk about is science and the law. I am a scientist by trade. I have a degree in biology and chemistry from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And so entering into the law field was not something that I thought I would do at first, not for technology. I thought that I would do it for humanity. That I was going to represent everyone who had a problem. But when I got into the law field, I found out that innovation was really exciting to me, and I couldn't just get rid of my roots as a scientist. So when we think about innovation and intellectual property, the thought process of protecting the inventions or the developments of the mind began a long time ago. In fact, our Constitution has a clause that states to promote science and the useful arts, we're going to give the inventors and creators this limited monopoly. And from this clause of the Constitution was born intellectual property. It is the foundation of our economy. If you think about businesses, most every startup business has a patent, a trademark, a copyright, or a trade secret. How many of you know how many flavors there are in Dr. Pepper? Raise your hand. How many flavors? 23. What are they? Right. No one knows because what we have is this intellectual property called a trade secret, where the inventors of this Dr. Pepper with the 23 flavors, it gives them an economic advantage. And because of that, they maintain its secrecy. So we're going to protect that for as long as it's secret, right? But wait, what's Dr. Pibb? Who's Dr. Pibb?
A ripoff.
A ripoff? And you say it's a ripoff of what? Dr. Pepper. How many flavors are there? No clue, right? But you know it tastes similar to Dr. Pepper. And one of the risks that we have with trade secrets as a protection of innovation is you cannot prevent someone from creating this knockoff. Whether it's through reverse engineering, I got a Dr. Pepper, I decided that it was vanilla, cherry, a little lemon, orange, and lime, and I've added that all together to my basic cola formula, and voila, Dr. Pibb. No complaint there, right? No litigation there for Dr. Pibb, or the HEB version. Yes?
What about the name?
The name, Dr. Pibb. Oh, wonderful. That is also protected. Every company has what we call, for most of their inventions, trademarks. And trademarks basically is branding. As I look out in the audience, I see a number of brands that you're wearing. Adidas, my favorite. It's a brand, and Dr. Pepper, right? We have to think about it. Dr. Pibb, very close in nature, but the protection is based upon consumer confusion. Would you pick up a Dr. Pibb and think it's a Dr. Pepper? No. No! So if there isn't this likelihood of consumer confusion with trademarks, right, well then there's not going to be anything actionable. And a trademark is any sound, symbol, smell, right? How many of you know what Chanel No. 5 smells like? Right, that's the most famous trademark that's a smell. Or the NBC sound, right? The three things. Those consumer versus the inventor. But we're going to reward the inventor's goodwill in developing this brand, okay? Now, I like to call the next one. This one is patents. So intellectual property was respected patents. The first patent was granted in 1790. And patents truly do enhance our community. What you have there is full disclosure for any process, combination of matter, systems that are developed, that's novel, right? So this is a really high threshold. It has to be new, novel, and it also has to be non-obvious. What does non-obvious mean? What's that mean?
Non-obvious.
Non-obvious, right? What does that mean, though? What does that mean?
Conspicuous.
Conspicuous? Yes, I like that.
However the lawyers define it.
However the lawyers define it. I like that answer, but not quite. We're going to talk about something that depends upon how the lawyers define it. Yes?
It's taking something that's already been made, making one tiny tweak to it, and then calling it something new.
Yeah, so what we're doing here is we're looking at what's already in the public domain. And if someone that's skilled in that area would easily identify this tweak to make something different, it's obvious. So it can't be obvious to someone who works in that field. So we have novelty, we have non-obviousness, and then it has to be useful. So the new invention has to be useful. Now I started going back when I was preparing for this lecture and looking at some older patents. And one that I saw was a method for swinging.
Swinging it back.
No, swinging in a swing. Right? A method for swinging in a swing. And I started to think to myself, okay, perhaps that was new, right? Something that we hadn't thought about with the tire swings, right? And so I started to kind of look to see a method of swinging. How is this new, non-obvious, and useful? So I pulled the patent, because at first I read the abstract for it. I pulled the patent, and I was overwhelmed. It was a swing that had handlebars where you could pump. So you're not only just using your legs, but you're also pumping, and it's creating a higher arc that you would get from the normal tire swing. Is that useful? Who said no? Let's think about that. It is very useful. Let's think about amputees that want to swing, but they can't use their legs. They can use their arms. So I really start to think about this. We truly do, as a society, grant these rights for innovations that are going to be useful. Then I said, okay, well, method of swinging didn't work. I thought that was going to be something that's totally not useful. And then I looked up another one, and it was a method of combing your hair. A method of a comb-over, right? So I'm thinking, okay, really, did we grant a patent for this? How is this new, number one? How is it non-obvious to someone skilled in the art, which would be a beautician? And how is it useful? What do you think? This method of a comb-over. What do you think about this? Is it new? Not the comb-over itself. Right? So the comb-over itself isn't new. But this method of making the hair move in different directions and putting the parts in was something that was new. Now the question becomes, is it not obvious?
I mean, the comb-over is called a comb-over because that's what you do to your hair.
Ah, I thought the same thing. So I pulled up the patent so I could really take a look at it to see what truly we're granting. And one of the things here was it was like it wasn't a comb over. It was like a circular with parts and comb forward, comb around, comb up, and then down. Now, obvious? No, not at all. Useful, yes, for those who would like to appear as they have a full head of hair. So absolutely useful. So when we're thinking about whether or not a particular invention meets the criteria for patentability, we really do have to think about how is it building on what's currently in the public domain, and whether or not there is some usefulness and something that wouldn't be obvious. Yes?
Would not obvious also be like not already common knowledge, or I guess you could call it the duh, that's how it's always been done?
Yeah.
I know that there are some things that we just do because that's how it's always been done, like tying shoes in a little bow.
Guess what?
Patent.
That was a patent. So that was a patent, right? Do you make the two bunny ears to tie, or do you tie and loop and pull through? Right? So when we're thinking about it, what you're really asking about is it truly new? And can we combine these things that are readily available in the public domain to get a patent? So let me answer this. I've got to do it in two ways because that's what lawyers do, right? We can never give you a direct answer to it. So I'm going to give you two ways to think about this, okay? So the first thing, and your first response is, what if it's the duh, right? Well, we don't give patents for duh. We simply don't, because if it's known already, it's considered in the public domain. And then if you're the inventor, and you use it or disclose it in a manner outside of a year before you seek a patent, you're not going to be able to get a patent. So we are protecting against the does. All right? So common knowledge, we're just not going to do it. Okay? Now the second way that I'm going to answer your question is, so it's already out there. It's been out there for longer than a year. It's not patentable. But now we really do have to think about how we're protecting business methods and methods of doing things, okay? And biotech and those type of things. So, easy answer is, it's section 101, right? When you think of college, 101 is like the introductory to something. But in patents, 101 is not simple. 101 simply is not simple. You really do have to think about, is this advancing innovation? Does it advance the art or the state of art that you're working in? So if it's not advancing or moving it forward, then we're not going to patent that either. Make sense? Okay, so one of the things that we have and that has happened over the years is we're seeing a lot more litigation in the area of intellectual property. And the one piece that I've not told you about, so I've told you about patents, I've told you about trade secrets, and we talked a bit about trademarks. But the other form of protection for intellectual property is copyright. Now, I like to call it the copyright clause, not really the patent clause, right? Although the first patent was granted in 1790, and the first copyright kind of far exceeded that. But copyrights are a lower threshold, so it's not novel. It's original. So original works of authorship that are fixed in a tangible medium. And I like the Copyright Act because it did something that no other act did. It anticipated. So it goes on to say, fixed in a tangible medium, now known or later developed. So it's giving us this opportunity for technology to advance and grow. And so the questions there aren't as tricky as they are with respect to patents when we're looking at what's the subject matter. All of these intellectual properties kind of touch upon one another. So copyrights, if you think about it, just about anything that is original, meaning that it owns its origin to a human. Like, we're not going to allow a monkey to take a picture and then it be subject to copyright, or an elephant paint a mural. It has to own its authorship to a human. No computers either. You can't get copyright for computer programmed drawings, etc., if it doesn't have this human behind it, okay? And it only requires about this much of creativity, right? Just original, just original. Now, we have this battle between copyright and patent, and where it comes to computer software. How many of you are computer science engineers here? Yeah. Okay, so we have to think about what's the best protection here. And when we start to think about them for companies, copyrights are worth $1.7 trillion in our economy annually. So when you start to think about companies, there are a lot of copyrights. And let me tell you, the reason why, the life term of the monopoly. It is life of the author, or the inventor, plus 70 years. It's a long time, a long time. And now, I like to call the 70 years the greedy grandkids clause, because most artists and inventors want to get their works out there. But it's the greedy grandkids that start to sue and enforce the rights of the artist. We have to think with computer programming, do we want to have life of the author plus 7 years? Or do we want to make a full disclosure of how absolutely everything works, and with the patent, get 20 years? What do you want? Computer software guy, what do you want?
Well, it depends on the development method, but usually I would want the copyright.
Yeah, you would want the copyright. You would want the copyright. Life of the author plus 70 years, and we know it just has to be original, not something that's novel. So the reason why you see copyrights counting for $1.78 trillion is they're easy to obtain. They're easier to obtain, yes.
What's the dollar amount you would put on patents for the economy?
Okay, so patents is very tricky because you got to throw in there research and development, and you got to do some tracking out. But I would say about 2.6 trillion. But the money that went into creating and the research and development is exceptionally expensive, and you're going to get that for a limited time.
Normally when I think of copyright as opposed to patent, I think of someone who's just wanting to make sure that due credit is given to the original author. I don't think of money necessarily, because even faculty members copyright certain things that we produce, but we don't expect to make any money off of it. But a patent I think of as being more geared toward protecting that, so that you can make money off somebody wanting to use that patent.
Okay, so that kind of pushes me to kind of where I want it to go. Thank you. So one of the things when we're thinking about this, weak rights, right? So if you think about copyright rights being a weaker right in the sense that the artist or creator wants attribution, and you don't really think of it as something to be monetized. But oh, raise your hand if you have Microsoft. A license to use your Apple iPhone, iTunes, raise your hand. Yeah, cable vision. How many of you have DirecTV? AT&T. All of these are things that are being monetized that are copyrights. Music, books, you're selling the books. So when you really think about copyrights, there is this idea that it's the weaker property. You just want attribution. But oh no, right? So when you think about the rights that you're being granted as a copyright holder, you get to exclude people from making reproductions. So you can't make a copy. You get to exclude people from public performances. You can't publicly perform my work without me. You can't even make a derivative work. So you know all of those upgrades that you have? Another company can't come in and do a Microsoft upgrade and then charge you for it, because that would infringe the copyright for the original program that's been written. Yes?
So how would copyrights work with, like, for example, a song being sung by multiple artists?
Ah, I love it.
Written by one artist, but down the road you hear another artist singing it.
Absolutely. Okay, so licensing. Okay, so one of the things that I think is very confusing when it comes to music is you have a number of rights that are kind of developed in there. So you have the lyrics, right? So the lyrics are protectable. You also have the rights to the sheet music, right, which is protectable. And then you also have the sound recording, which is protectable as well. So when you're thinking about music, you have 3 rights there. So let's think about it, Beyonce, right? So Beyonce, she may actually be the writer, but if she's not, she's simply the performer. So the only right she has is to the sound recording if she's not the actual writer of the music and lyrics. The writer of the music and lyrics has the ability to control whether or not a third party can perform. So they maintain the performance rights, but not the sound recording rights. That would be Beyonce. So what Beyonce can stop is someone for sampling her song with her voice and the arrangement that she's placed there. Make sense?
Can you transfer these rights?
Oh, these rights are so transferable. And I'm going to tell you something that is really cool about this. That's how you make your money, licensing the rights. So patents, of course, we want to practice the patents that we've created because that's where you're going to get your source. And in exchange for your fully disclosing how it works, you cannot have any secrets. Okay, so engineering students, raise your hand. Oh yeah. So you in your patent, in what's called an abstract, in your specifications, you're going to have to go step by step by step in order to enable your invention to work. So anyone that's skilled in that particular area would be able to duplicate it. So in exchange for that full disclosure on how to do it, can't leave out a step and say, I'm going to keep that step to myself, right? You can't trade secret a step in your patent. You've got to fully disclose it. We're giving you 20 years. And in those 20 years, you're going to make your money through licensing. Yes?
Can licensing for written music include a royalty of performance profits? So, you know, Beyonce goes and performs the song, and she makes a certain amount of money from selling out the venue. Can the person who licenses stipulate that, you know what, I want like 10% of your profits from every performance that you do of this song? But then she's performing multiple songs, this is only one song of that. So do you have to work out a percentage, or is that even something that can be done?
So yes. So the easy answer to that is yes. One of the things that's perfect about licensing is you can fashion it any way that you like, so long as it's not anti-competitive. Okay? Because then you run into antitrust, and we don't like antitrust. Right? So that's gonna be something that's the feds are gonna come in and stop you from doing it.
You said with your example of Windows that a third party can't come in and modify the Windows program and make it better and then try and sell it. But can they come in and modify the Windows program and then give it away for free? The improved program?
No. No. And you tell me why not.
Probably because Windows wants to be making money.
Yes, Windows wants to be making money. It is the owner of the copyright. And the copyright holder gets to determine whether or not derivative rights can be made or derivative works can be made. And what's so interesting about this is even if your derivative work that's based on the Windows platform is something that can stand alone and be copyrighted by itself, if you don't have permission from the underlying copyright holder, you're infringing. So we're not giving you a copyright for your new original work of authorship. We're simply not going to do it. And that's the benefit that we get. So when we start to think about rights that are weak rights, which we don't have any right now that we've talked about. We've talked much about really strong rights, but when you have rights that are weak, particularly in the area of business method patents and software patents, we've got to kind of figure out, is there this true tangible usefulness that's being created from the program, or is it an abstract idea? Abstract ideas aren't protectable, and so when you start to think about these weak rights, it'll cost you a ton of money, but then your enforcement is low. It's hard to enforce. On the other side, when you have rights that are too strong, it stifles creativity and it stifles innovation, because now I have this right and I'm going to just smash anyone who's swinging in a swing using the arm thing. Stop swinging. And so no one can develop in that area. And so what we've seen over the last 5 years or so is this developing court docket in the Supreme Court, with about, I would say about 11% of its docket being intellectual property cases. This is something that wasn't heard of. And for me, it's fun, right? I get to write about this stuff. I get to predict how the court is going to rule. I get called in as an expert to write a brief to the court saying this is what should be done. And it's so exciting because technology is changing. And people are starting, when the economy was down, guess what happened? Everyone started suing, because everyone had intellectual property rights that they weren't really concerned with before, but now this is a source of revenue. So what we see happening in these court cases is trying to find the Goldilocks for protection. Not too weak, not too strong, but just right to ensure that, one, inventors are able to invent and create, and two, that you're being incentivized to do this, and three, that you're reaping the rewards of your hard work. That's truly what intellectual property law is about.
So it seems like most software falls under copyright. I didn't realize that until just then. But do things like algorithms, whether it were written out in the program or just the mathematical model of what the algorithm would be defined as, say if Netflix is matching, or Google back in whenever this started its first search engine, I guess you could say, would that be a copyright?
So here's the thing that I want you guys to think about. You have to decide, because depending upon the method, it could be a patent or a copyright. Okay, it could be one or the other. With respect to deciding, right, the things that we have to look at is, with respect to copyrights, can't be functional. All right, it really has to be aesthetics and non-functional, because the functional components are covered under patents. So while there is this overlap, we don't want to, it can be both. You can have multiple. You can have multiple. Some components are functional, but they also have the aesthetic components. And I'll give you the perfect case, video games. Video games. Some components of them are aesthetic, but then they're run by a program that's useful, that you can obtain a patent for, because you have a useful end result that is related to the programming.
What happens if you re-implement something like cleaner, you see the end result, and you find your own way to the same end result?
Oh, okay. So, couple of things. Okay. So, depending upon the particular right that you've decided to use, and I call trade secrets the first cousins of patents. right? Because it truly is something, a process or some know-how that's benefiting you by virtue of not everyone knowing it, okay? Patents, you fully disclose. All right, so if you create something independent of the patent and it falls within the claims of the patent, it's infringement.
Even if it was original.
Even if it was original, because it's not original that gives you the protection for patent. It's novel, it's new.
Yeah, so if you can implement the same thing not using their name.
So, yes, so one of the, okay, so, I started practice at a large law firm in Chicago. And one of the things that I did, because I have this biology and chemistry degree, was I worked for a pharmaceutical company. So that was my client. And my client would present to me all of these other drugs out in the claims, and I had to read the claims of these drugs, and then figure out if what they were doing fell within those claims. If it's outside of those claims, guess what? It's not protected. And so a lot of the drugs that you see being developed that have the same therapeutic result necessarily may not be identical to the claims in another patent, which is also really wonderful because most drugs have trademarks. In fact, the #1 trademark applicants over the last 5 years was Novartis and GlaxoSmithKline. Make sense? So you have these drug companies coming up with names, trademarks, for the various drugs that they're creating. So like Zysol, who knows? Right, we've got one. It's an allergy drug, very similar to Allegra, Zyrtec, Claritin. So you see these drugs being used. You've got a patent for the drug itself, and then you have the secondary protection, the trademark for that particular name. I saw a hand in the very back, yes.
Why is it that these patent trolls all gravitate towards East Texas?
Rocket Docket. So I love it, but let me tell you, you're going to see, so East Texas is a wonderful place to practice intellectual property, and there's a couple of things that happens with patent trolls, or copyright trolls for that matter. So I'm going to tell you what a patent troll is. A patent troll is a non-practicing entity. So this particular entity does not practice the invention that they're enforcing, but rather they have the rights, and what they do is they look for people who may possibly be infringing a patent claim or claims. And you most see non-practicing entities in the area of technology, the internet, those types of spaces. And so what you're seeing happen there is they're like, wait a minute, you've just crossed over my bridge of my patent, you must pay. Okay? So you have the troll under the bridge saying, give me, give me, give me. And what's really interesting about this is patent infringement is strict liability. You can't say, oh, I didn't know. Well, you know why? Because you do know. Because full disclosure has been made, and you can take a look at all of these patents, just like I went to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and found the comb-over style and the sling. You can do those same things, right? So these non-practicing entities come to East Texas because, one, we have great judges who are very familiar with this, and the docket was moving very quickly. Now, this is going to change because of a case that just came from the Supreme Court that says you really do need to think about whether or not there's a connection to where you're filing these cases happening. So we haven't seen quite yet whether or not the litigation that you see in East Texas is going to dry up completely because courts are being like, whatever, we don't care what you say, this case is going to stay here. Does that make sense? So moving it through, experts in the area, and it's cheaper. Just think about it. You've got wonderful lawyers here in Texas, and the fees for intellectual property lawyers in Texas are maybe like $350, $400 an hour. In Chicago, it's $600, $750, $800 an hour. So if you're a company and you're enforcing these rights, where do you want to go? Texas! East Texas, you want to come here. So again, what we're seeing happening because of this, we have a Supreme Court case that's trying to balance, trying to find the Goldilocks here. Not too weak, not too strong. The other thing that you see that influences patent trolls or copyright trolls, because copyright trolls do the same thing, except for they extort money from people. And I'll give you the example. So copyright, strict liability as well. You have a copyright, any unauthorized distribution, reproduction, derivative work, the person is liable. So generally what you see happening here is in the pornography industry, they own copyrights to their movies. Right? They own copyrights. And so illegal downloads. So the copyright trolls decide and they say, okay, in East Texas, it's going to cost someone $3,000 to hire a lawyer to defend against this copyright infringement lawsuit. So what we're going to do is we're going to send them a cease and desist letter saying, stop. Otherwise, we're going to publicize that you're watching illegal downloads of pornography and pay us the money. So, and the amount is right below what it would cost to hire a lawyer to defend against you. So guess what people do? They pay. So do you want to pay $1,500 or do you want to pay $3,000? Do you want to pay $1,500 and not have my name in a public record for an illegal download of pornography? Or do I want to pay $300 and have this happen to me? And so these copyright trolls were making tons of money, so were non-practicing entities. So we have rules kind of developing, which all of you should be aware of, right? Because your technology could be subject to one of these non-practicing entities. All right, so the last thing that I'd like to share with you, and then I'll open it up for questions, is one intellectual property that no one ever thinks about. And that's when you become famous. You have this right in your persona, in your person. So one of the things that you often see is individuals having these rights to decide how to use their persona or their identities for commercial exploit. Right? So if someone uses the name or likeness of a celebrity without their permission, then that celebrity has a cause of action against them. And I think my favorite case is Vanna White versus Samsung. So Samsung has this new product that they want to advertise. And they asked Vanna White, did she want to be a part of the commercial? And she said, absolutely not. So basically the commercial was going to be talking about their new microwave. And she would turn over the letters, of course, and it would say Samsung, right? Well, she said, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Well, Samsung, being the innovators that they are, they said, we still like this thing, and we want to do it. So they created a robot that had blonde hair, and the robot, of course, went and flipped over the letters, right? And, of course, Samsung. Vanna White, of course, sued because of that whole blonde hair, flipping letters, spelling out is a part of her, and everyone associated that robot with Vanna White. And so Vanna White was able to say, hey, look I did not authorize you to use my likeness or name in the advertising of your product, and now you have to pay me. It's all about the money. Any questions? Yes. She would never patent herself because human beings are not patentable subject matter. Okay? So if it's naturally occurring in nature, you can't get a patent. But no, over time you develop this persona. And so what we look at is whether or not the facts would suggest that individual. So Vanna White's persona is linked and is permanently linked to turning over those letters for that. I'll give you a couple of, here's Johnny. Who's that? Johnny Carson, right? So that phrase is associated with him. Bam.
Emerald Lagasse.
Yes, Emerald Lagasse. So certain things, if it comes to your mind, a particular person, then they're protected and others from using that without their permission. That's hot. Who's that? That's hot. Paris Hilton, right? Okay, so really, when we're thinking about all of these intellectual properties, it is the creations of the mind, whether we're fixing them in a tangible medium or whether we're creating something new and fully disclosing so that it can advance the area of innovation, or if we're keeping it secret so that we can develop and gain a monetary advance in that. It is truly to protect. Yes?
So how does this apply to things like memes? Like someone takes a picture of someone else.
Okay, let's think about this because I want you guys to think about the memes. So you have a picture, you have a photo. The copyright in and to the photo belongs to who? The person that took the photo.
What about the person in the photo? Like if it's a photo of a celebrity.
Alright, so, photo of the person in, remember, we can have a whole bunch of rights overlapping. The person in the photo may, if it's a celebrity, has control of their image in that photo. And in fact, I tell people, I need to see the picture that you just took of me. I control my image online. So, I will delete a picture that I don't like because you have those rights. But if I allow you to take a picture of me, and it doesn't have to be in writing, then the picture's rights belong to the taker, to the photographer. Now, with respect to memes, we have in copyright what's called a fair use, right? Because we've got to give, not everyone is going to allow you to use their works, right? And so you see in mostly all intellectual property this idea of fair use. And so, if it's for educational purposes, and memes, I say is social commentary, for those types of things, we're going to allow this use where the creator wouldn't allow it. Okay, so this idea of fair use. Yes?
So I was in the industry for 27 years, Procter & Gamble, and we worked a lot with universities. And one of the things I saw the entire chemical industry doing is pulling out of universities because of intellectual property issues. Could you explain a little bit why that is? Because I think that would be really pertinent to this group.
Okay, so there are a couple of things with universities and intellectual property. So it depends upon the way that the agreements are structured for your university, who actually owns the intellectual property. Now, remember, I told you that you have to own it to human invention. So a company technically can never be an inventor. The company owns the patents because the inventors had to assign it to the company that they work for. A lot of companies are pulling out of university because of university research because there isn't a clear delineation who owns what. And therefore the assignments and to these companies become tricky because university policies don't necessarily dictate, particularly with respect to student involvement on how this works. And I'll give you one that is just like egregious. How many of you have ever used SAS? SAS, Statistical Analysis Program. Well, that was a student-developed program. And the university had no rights to it. So Goodnight and developers left the university and made this multi-billion-dollar industry on statistical analysis software. And so what happens is when companies like Procter & Gamble are funding these things and not necessarily having the rights, remember those weak rights, it costs more to gain them than it's worth to try to enforce them. So, you gotta look at your university's policy to determine how the intellectual rights are being allocated. Do you own it as an individual, as a researcher, or is it subject to assignment to the university?
How would patents and citation, and copyrights work with citation and just ignorance? Like, I thought it was new, had no clue that somewhere way back in 1999 someone had the same idea.
Way back.
Okay, so if you go way back to 1999, right? Let's see, we're 2018. Depending upon the patent, it only lasts 20 years. So you may be okay. Right? It was way back there. It only lasts 20 years. But guess what? There's no such thing as innocent infringement of a patent. It's a strict liability. If you infringe, you infringe. With respect to copyright protection, there's this idea of willful infringement versus innocent infringement. And what happens there is what the copyright holders' damages are going to be. So with respect to copyright infringement, if you are a willful infringer, it can go from a base of $650 per infringement to $150,000 per infringement. Willfulness, right, or if you're innocent, you're going to be way at the lower end.
Like
versus
maybe $5.
well, no, statutory damages, you're definitely going to get $650.
Statutory damages.
Yes, so copyright has this damage structure where it tells you what your floor is in the statute, and the floor in the statute is $650. The ceiling in the statute is $150,000 per infringement. So you can rack up a whole bunch of dollars owned by infringing someone's song.
Okay, this will have to be the last question over here because people have to go.
Is there a good place to research patents besides just, the USPTO patent website? Is there a good website to go and find?
Google, I love Google search engine. They have, it's easier to search than the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office if you're not accustomed to doing patent searches. But patents and trademarks and copyrights all have repositories with their respective governmental entities, and you can look for them and you can find them. Google is the best search.
Okay, that will bring to an end this particular talk. We would like to thank